In one of my recent videos, and I will put a little pop-up in the corner so you can see a link to that video, I spoke about being in the middle of a dream, and within my dream, talking about dreaming of the place that I was currently inside of so many times. So I was talking about dreaming of the place that I was in within my dream. Very Inception. And I realized that happens actually a lot within my recurring dreamscapes, for lack of a better term. I have a lot of recurring dream not themes, but places. And I sort of, in my head, I kind of think of them as alternate universe dreams, because I go back to these places and time has lapsed within these places, and I just sort of pick up, like I'm living a day in the life of myself in this sort of universe where I lived differently than I actually do. So if you could think of it as if, well, for example, in one of these alternate universe dream reality places I go to in my dreams, I am working at a place that I used to work at in my 20s, but I left that job and I went to a different job. But it's as if I didn't leave that job and I stayed there, but it's also different in that it was a newspaper. And so anyone who really has paid much attention to the newspaper industry over the past 20 years, it's completely changed, which is why I left, which is why many people left. And the reason it changed primarily, almost entirely, was because of the internet. In this alternate dream reality that I dream of regularly, I don't think the internet exists. And computers are still the large, I don't know if anyone is old enough to remember back in the early 2000s, computer monitors were huge. They were like these giant heavy boxes that would sit on a desk. And in my dream reality, the desktop monitors are still massive like that. And I don't think there's internet. And so because of that, the newspaper industry in that dreamscape didn't shift. It just kept continuing on its normal trajectory. Which is notable because within my dream, the newspaper that I work at in my dream, which in the real world, I left this newspaper back in 2008. So quite a while ago. Because it was just, the newsroom kept shrinking more and more and more over time, and people were being laid off and wages were not good. And you sort of get to a point where you realize you can't do a job you love just because you love a job. You need to actually make money and pay bills and not just be sacrificing all your time to your job, especially when it doesn't really give back to you in the way you need. Sidetracked. But the point is, in the real world, this newspaper and all newspapers, they all shrunk considerably. The staffs, the literal buildings, they sold off buildings. The whole industry shrank dramatically due to the internet. And in my dream world, the internet didn't happen, or at least not in the same way it did in real life. And so this newspaper is just huge and way bigger than it is in the real world, and just packed with, the newsroom is packed and lively, and they still use the old-fashioned, if you go to, they're still used at banks. When you go through the drive-thru at the bank, they have those sealed vacuum tubes to carry information. And in the newspaper building that I worked at in real life, they used the same type of setup. They would put stories or whatever in the tubes, and the tubes actually ran back in the day, in the early 1900s or whenever they were invented. I have no idea, but way back in time. These tubes actually did exist in the newspaper office I worked at, and they would use these same vacuum tubes that you see at the drive-thru at banks to send information quickly from one area to another in the building, because it's a huge building. And they were making multiple newspapers a day at that point. So cut to like when I worked there in real life, those had been long gone, but in my dream reality, they still use those, which was really trippy. The point is, I dream of these multiple dream realities. So that's just one. I'm still in a different one. I'm living in that same city, which I don't actually live in anymore. But I own a store on like the main historic drag where there's all these old like historic shops, and it's really beautiful and kitschy in New England. And in this alternate dream reality, I own a little like oddity shop there. And across the street from my oddity shop, there's a sort of like thrift shop, reuse kind of like. My shop is literally just like things you would see in a weird museum, but the shop across the street is like a typical, if you think of a thrift shop or a vintage shop, that's what it is. And in this dream world, well, in the real world, I dream about going into that thrift store and just like seeing what's in there. But I was dreaming, I was within the dream world where I own an oddity shop. And within that dream world, I closed up my shop for the day or whatever. And I walked across the street and I went into the thrift store and I was walking through the aisles and that owner came to talk to me. And I said, I've had so many dreams about being in here. I wanted to come check it out. Which is an Inception moment because I dream of walking through the thrift store in my real world dreams, which is just like I was having a real world dream in that moment, talking about it's just a mind fuck. Anyhow, thanks for listening.